Hi, everybody. I'm Mark Newberg. I'm Managing Director of Impact Investment Strategies for Fivestone Green Capital. Welcome to Ivory Tower to Muddy Boots, otherwise known as how you take research and make stuff happen with it. Hi to everyone. We're live streaming. We'll be on YouTube, so at your homes, in your coffee shops around the world. Hope you have a good time. What we're going to do is simply this. We've got 4 really, really smart people and 1 person who's going to sound a lot like a student asking a ton of questions. That's me. Think of this as your favorite college course or graduate course, but you have 4 professors, one of whom is Australian. That would be Ben. And we're going to have some presentations. We're going to have the world premiere of a new report by Kathy Clark, among others. And then we're going to have some discussion, and I'm going to open it up to questions. So with little further ado, we've got Ben Thornley, who's the Director of Insight at Pacific Community Ventures, Paula Goldman, who is the Director of the Knowledge and Advocacy Practice at the Omidyar Network. Alicia Robb is a Senior Research Fellow at the Kauffman Foundation, and Kathy Clark is the Founding Director of CASE, the Center for the Advancement of Social Entrepreneurship, and the Duke Impact Investing Initiative at the Fuqua School of Business in Durham. I think that's the full title. Anyway, with that, we're going to go into presentations, and then we will have a whole bunch of discussion. So thanks for being here. And Ben Thornley, would you like to kick it off and make fun of me at the same time?
Thanks, Mark. It's good to be here. I'm Ben Thornley with Pacific Community Ventures, which is a nonprofit CDFI in San Francisco, and we have a dedicated think tank within PCV called Insight, which I direct. I'm really excited to be here, and there's a little bit of, you can go through the next slide if you want, Kathy. I'm going to be a little bit schizophrenic and run through a lot of this very quickly. So as you can see, I'm going to be talking about 2 separate pieces of research, and I'm not going to get into the detail all that much. There are lots of reports online. I can direct you to those, and we can always talk more offline about the details. But I'm really energized because I love to sort of break people's easy perceptions and sort of casual preconceptions, and you know, it really annoyed me when I heard Randy on the lunchtime panel, you know, talk about changing the world from the inside, as though that's the only choice you have, to be on the inside or the outside, and what I'm here to tell you is that is not the world we live in anymore, as far as I can tell. And one of the pieces of research where I'll begin is the role of government in supporting social enterprise and impact investing. And we just launched the World Economic Forum report in Peru a couple of weeks ago. We're launching it in New York on Monday and Washington on Tuesday. And what I saw in Peru was the complete antithesis of what Randy described. These are public officials who are silo busting. They are all about collaboration. They are all about local empowerment. They're all about outcomes-oriented commissioning and policy making. I mean, this is, and so I guess the point I would make is that, you know, government is a part of impact investing and social enterprise. It always has been. It is becoming a bigger part because it sees that the solutions that investors and social entrepreneurs bring to the table are absolutely essential in supporting them to, you know, solve really important issues like extreme poverty. And you know, there are many entrepreneurs within government who are doing this, and you know, they would not think of themselves as being on the outside throwing stones at people on the inside. They would think of themselves as partners with you in this journey. And so I think that you know, that idea of collaboration and partnership is an important one, and coming out of our policy research, and Kathy, you can switch to the next slide if you like. You know, again, I won't talk about this specifically, but you know, the message that I want to deliver with respect to the role of government in impact investing is we need to be part of that conversation. Government is desperate for solutions right now, whether it's because of austerity, whether it's because they see social enterprise as a really rapidly growing sector, which is a key motivation for a lot of governments. In the UK, social impact investing is growing at 38% annually, like they get that, they see that this is an important economic sector, or whether because they believe, as they do in the UK, that social innovation essentially pilots the government programs of the future, or the programs that they can be connected to in the future. And so there's a lot of, like the move towards a more empirical form of government, more data-driven. All these very foundational trends are driving a very different perception of government. And I would encourage us all to be a part of that. I mean, I think that this is really a solutions economy, as Deloitte is calling it at the moment. And that involves being more agnostic to exactly what the solution looks like. And so it's really all about public-private partnership in the truest sense. And there are opportunities for social entrepreneurs to contribute to that, to inform your local officials, to inform state officials of what is and what is not working. And I think if you find the right people within government, they are hungry for that data. And so please be open-minded about government as an equal partner in this, in our efforts to make the world a better place, because they really are being very forward-looking right now and open to this. And as an indicator of the level to which this is now being elevated, the G8 meeting, which the UK is hosting in June, one of 6 priority subjects that those governments will be discussing is social impact investing. And the UK has really been leading the charge internationally. I think it's becoming a competitiveness issue also. And I think that is the message we need to send to Washington, that our policymakers need to get with the program, because this is the future of our economy. And we all have a role in telling that story and doing it in a collaborative fashion. So that's the policy stuff. As I said, I'm not going to talk about the detail, but this is just to give you a sense of the way policymakers are thinking about this and trying to understand the role that they can play in the market. The next slide is a similar one. And this comes from, sorry, it doesn't come out very well on the projection, but this is from the World Economic Forum report. I think there may be some copies on the front table, and essentially the whole process of engaging with the market is an actual policy strategy in and of itself that governments are using, and so you're part of that. You are part of an explicit government strategy to figure this out. So that's my schizophrenic, angry, 30,000-foot advocating for policy.
You're really worked up, aren't you?
Yeah, I do get worked up about government. I love government; it's important. But the next project I'm going to talk about is more at 10,000 feet instead of 30,000 feet. And this is a collaborative project that we've been working on with Kathy and Jed Emerson at Impact Assets, with Impact Assets, friends here from Impact Assets, of course. And it's supported by Paula at Omidyar, among a group of other funders also. And the objective here was to look at funds that had a track record of successful performance in impact investing. And by performance, we were essentially agnostic about where they fell on the financial or social continuum. What mattered to us was that their investors were happy, and their limited partners felt that this fund had been successful by meeting the diverse objectives that they had, both financial and social. So the process necessarily involved us talking to a lot of limited partners. To be honest, that was probably our main data point in terms of selecting a group of funds that we could then case study in some depth. And so we went through the process of shortlisting the funds. We're now in the process of having long conversations and collecting data. We've signed NDAs with all the funds to really enable them to be open and honest with us about what has and has not worked. So the idea here is that we will end up with a set of best practices, although I don't particularly like that term, but a set of behaviours and strategies, ways of thinking about the market that seem to have led to success among this group of funds. And the other thing we're doing is really trying to help people understand what this market looks like with more sophistication than a continuum between financial return, or a dichotomy between financial first and impact first. We think this is a much more nuanced and sort of complicated market, and it's time for us to bring more data and evidence to the table to have that discussion. So the next slide, which is my last slide, and I will spend a couple of minutes just talking through this because this is an initial attempt on our part just to help explain to people what funds are actually doing. Now remember that the funds that, and we've come up with this landscape through the funds that we're case studying. So it's important to remember that there are successful funds in each of these 4 quadrants. It's not like one of these is more successful than the other. It's that there is a role for funds to play across the market. And so what we've looked at here to try and understand what a fund is trying to accomplish is where the money comes from. So what motivates the LPs to become part of a fund. And by mandate driven, we mean, say for example, government mandate, in the case of the Community Reinvestment Act in the United States, or it might be government money specifically, like development finance institutions are investing because that is their mandate. They have to invest that money, they have to deploy it. Mission driven obviously implies that it's more of a values-oriented investment, perhaps more voluntary at some level, but it's a different kind of investment. And then on the x-axis, you'll see what we differentiate there between is between investments at an earlier stage and a later stage. And what we've found, and I think Paula's research attests to this, and similar, the Monitor report, the Acumen report recently, I think, this is a big challenge, the stage that we invest at. There are specific challenges associated with investing at an early stage versus investing at a later stage. And stage can be proxy for a number of different things, like the type of capital that's required, for example. And so what we've realized is that if you think about funds and where they fall on this, they fall into these 4 relatively distinct categories, although clearly there's crossover between them. But think, for example, about a community finance institution. Like one group we're looking at is Axion Texas, which is a very successful microfinance lender in the United States. Most of their money comes from banks who are mandated to provide it through the Community Reinvestment Act, and they're making investments at an early stage. So we would put a lot of CDFIs in that first responder category. Now, a lot of them are never going to move from there. And what we've realized is that that's okay. Scale doesn't mean moving into a different quadrant. It means that you do what you do successfully. And there are a set of funds that will always be needed to be first responders, where market failure is very entrenched and where government will always be needed to provide that mandate. And so there's a set of funds, and they're very vibrant. It's a large sector, it's a subsector of this market that are first responders. Move across to the solution specialists. An example there might be, for example, the fund managers that invest economically targeted investments in the United States on behalf of pension funds. Where, for example, CalPERS has a very specific objective to support women and minority businesses. They might have an emerging manager program, or they may be interested in investing just in California. And so those funds tend to be more mature, investing at a later stage. These are $200, $300 million private equity funds. So they're investing in companies with over $5 million of revenue primarily. But they provide a very specific social solution, as in CalPERS needs to support California and create quality jobs in California. This fund will be created with that explicit mandate in mind. So they're very targeted funds. And most of the capital, again, tends to be mandate driven. On the bottom left, what we call the creatives, they're blending capital from various sources. The capital tends to be a little more mission driven. For example, SJF may fall into that category. Omidyar Network would probably fall into that category. And these are funds that are being very creative about blending capital and figuring out how to invest in an early stage, which is hard to do. And then scale agents, again, ones that have a lot of scale agents have come down from the solution specialist place. So think, for example, about Bridges Ventures in the UK, which started with a lot of government support. So this is mandate-driven capital. But as they've grown and proven the model, they're attracting more mission-driven capital. So they're attracting more non-government money, essentially. And so what they've figured out is how to do this at scale and blend capital and invest in larger companies. And so we essentially call those kinds of funds scale agents. This is very preliminary. I mean, our final report will probably not be coming out until later in the fall. But I did want to share it with you, I guess partly to test the water. We'd love to hear what you think about it, frankly. But we're excited about it. We think it presents a more sophisticated understanding of what a fund is actually doing and what it's contributing to the market. So I thought I'd throw that out there today, and thanks very much.
All right. So as we transition slide decks, if I sum this up in 5 seconds or fewer, government is sometimes good, and impact is not just one thing.
Yeah, I like that.
Okay.
I like that. Thank you, Mark.
Fran Siegel can design T-shirts. I'll do bumper stickers. Paula?
Yeah. Well, I have the privilege at Omidyar Network both of funding external research and also conducting research internally. So I wanted to talk for a few minutes about that. Did want to give a shout out to the millions of people watching right now online.
And millions.
Yeah, millions. I'm sure they're riveted. So if we can skip the first few slides and go to skip.
That was cute.
There we go.
I like this
There we go.
class.
Okay. Yeah. I really want like the world premiere report. We want to focus
That's right.
there, right? So I'm just going to be very brief. We basically last year had the chance to look back at what was then an 8-year track record in impact investing and think about what we've learned and our own track record, where our own pain points were, and what we were seeing in the field. And this was a series of blog posts, basically a research report released as a series of blog posts called Priming the Pump. And if I had to condense it, there were 3 recommendations in there. The first was about the dearth of early stage risk capital that exists in the impact investing market right now. We did a back of the envelope calculation. We're looking at base of pyramid impact investing. And, of the $9 billion or so that the GIN estimates going into impact investing, I think this year, our best estimate that something like 200 million of that is going into early stage impact investing in the BOP, like a tiny little fraction. And the question is, there's been a tremendous amount of hype around impact investing and the proposition that you can make fantastic returns and have great social impact, and that's wonderful. But if this is actually going to be something additional to what commercial markets already do, in that there are already a lot of companies that have fantastic social impact and get funded, they get funders, if we're going to need to go earlier stage and actually take the risks on innovations that are not yet proven and de-risk them so that commercial investors can come in. And so the first piece was about that. The second piece, actually, can we go next one. The second piece was about investing in sector-based infrastructure. Actually, can we go back one slide? So just to illustrate the piece about how we think about early stage investing. Bridge International Academies is kind of one of the current darlings of the space, right? A low cost, affordable education chain, largest in Africa. And the way that we think about investing, and we were willing to go in before traditional investors were willing to go in, and they have since, de-risked their model and have become very attractive to commercial investors. But the way that we thought about investing was, hey, look, these guys are, they may serve millions of people, but they're innovating a model of affordable, high-quality education for the slums of Africa that, if they succeed, will generate a competitive market. That means that the prices will go down. This will be more accessible to millions more students, and the quality will go up. And we will have all this indirect impact as well. And we would be thrilled if more investors were willing to take those kinds of risks for system-wide impact. So that's the first recommendation. The second one is about sector-based infrastructure. And the short story here is whenever we go into a sector, whether it's education or financial inclusion, we find that our entrepreneurs, not surprisingly, face common challenges. And yet they can't, as individual firms, attack those challenges on their own often. Some of them they can. So if we go to the next, I'm sorry, actually, sorry, one back. No. So just as an example, in microfinance, when we did a lot of direct investing in microfinance institutions, we also realized that MFIs themselves shared challenges like currency exchange risk. They were borrowing in one currency and lending in another. And so we used some of our capital to invest in something called MFX, for example, of one of many sort of what we call infrastructure investments that help them hedge that risk, where we didn't expect a market rate of return on our investment in MFX, but we thought it would vastly accelerate the reach of the industry and the ability to reach more poor customers more quickly. And then, so next slide, the final recommendation, picking up on your exhortation about policy and politics, and if that's as angry as you get, I don't know. I'd like to see you a little angry.
Gosh darn it! I mean,
was, actually, it's astounding to me that after the 2010 microfinance crisis in India, that we're just like walking around, I'm like, oh, that was microfinance. No, this is every single industry where we're serving the poor. We face the same risk. And the risk, I would describe it as twofold. One is that, frankly, this is political, right? So there's a double jeopardy. If you're using for-profit models to serve the poor, you can fail because the business you invest in fails. You can also fail if you're too successful, right? Because there's this very political question of what kind of profitability is acceptable when you're serving the poor. We gotta get on top of that question. Part of that is about politics, that is building a really healthy and robust set of relationships with policymakers and advocates in these communities. And part of it is about policy and almost self-regulation. It's about a set of best principles for consumer protection in each of the industries that we're investing in. So one last slide there. Looking at the microfinance crisis, the cost of this in human lives, or in sort of not actual human, but in terms of the human cost of this, is incredible. So had we been able to avoid the microfinance crisis in India, now an additional 20 million people would have access to financial services who don't, right? So these trajectories, even tiny little bumps in one direction or another, make a huge difference, and we really have to start paying more attention to that. And I'm done.
Wait,
awesome.
Path forward.
No? It's hard. The path forward just basically says take all those three things, invest early, do policy, do infrastructure, and you can vastly accelerate the growth of individual markets. Done.
We needed that. We needed that little optimism wrap.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
I'm not even trying for a bumper sticker on that one. But very clear areas of need, clear areas of resources that can be devoted to those needs, and clear effects for not doing it right. Yeah. Alicia?
Yes. Well, I'm in a similar boat where I want Kathy to get to her report, so I will be quick. I don't even have slides for you. I'm a senior research fellow with the Kauffman Foundation, and the Kauffman Foundation is the only foundation in the world dedicated to entrepreneurship. Our mission is really to create a more entrepreneurial economy, and we focus mainly on the U.S., but we do have some global reach through some of our partnerships like Startup Weekend, Global Entrepreneurship Week, and so forth. I'm in research and policy, and what we try to do is do research and create data so others can do research in figuring out how to make a more entrepreneurial economy. What are the best practices in entrepreneurship and education training programs? How do we get more high growth, high impact entrepreneurship in our country? How do we make entrepreneurs more effective? So I'm the principal investigator of the Kauffman Firm Survey, which is a longitudinal study of startups that began operations in 2004 that we've tracked over 8 years, and we actually just finished this. So now we have 8 years of data on 5,000 startups in the US and tracking them annually, and things from innovation to financing to performance, survival, etc. One thing that we wanted to do is show the government that they can and should be collecting longitudinal data. There's been a lot of cutbacks in the government, and one of the things on the cutting block is always data through the census and other government agencies that collect data. But in order to make informed policy recommendations, you need good data. And if we don't have data, we're not making sound policy decisions. So Kauffman has been very instrumental in various data initiatives in the U.S. around entrepreneurship, entrepreneurial finance, education. Our two main focus areas of funding are education and entrepreneurship. In education, in the STEM fields, but also even at the elementary level. We have actually just started a charter school in the last couple of years. We've also done things like Labs, which is an accelerator program. We have an initiative called 1 Million Cups, which is a weekly chapter program that's been expanding across the U.S. and getting entrepreneurs together in a community to help build businesses and the ecosystem. We were very involved with the passing of the Jobs Act, and we feel strongly that the crowdfunding initiatives that are coming out of that will certainly raise a whole another source of financing for entrepreneurs. I think I'm just gonna end there and just say I'm happy to answer questions about what we're doing and how we're getting involved in this space. In terms of impact investing, one of the things we're looking at now is setting a research agenda around crowdfunding as the SEC puts the rulings into law, and also to look at angel investor training and accelerator, best practices and accelerators. So looking at how we can create data and research initiatives around better understanding what works and doesn't work.
All right. We love entrepreneurs and we love data. All right.
A bumper sticker for me?
That's so good. He's so good at bumper
I bet
stickers.
there's a socially responsible print shop that can do that. So we probably should have background theme music and flashing lights and stuff, but instead of that, Professor Clark, would you take us to school, please?
My goodness, don't raise expectations like that. That's not fair. I just wanted to thank Alicia because she didn't talk about all the incredible work that she's done and all of these. She's like one of the most foremost researchers on women entrepreneurs, on incubators, on a whole bunch of stuff, and that she didn't talk about. So I'm really pleased that she's here to react and help us think more about the value of what we're trying to do. So we're really pleased to launch this report today, and I handed you guys out an executive summary. The full report is at bit.ly/accelerate impact. And I'm going to just walk you through some of the highlights of what we were trying to do. So unlike the Kauffman survey, the impact investing field does not have 8 years of longitudinal data around impact enterprises. In fact, we have almost none. I did a survey 10 years ago, which was the first survey of for-profit impact enterprises, the kind that we see through Investor Circle every day. And I was able to collect information from about 100 enterprises. Last summer, SJF Institute and Case at Duke partnered to do this research with support from the Rockefeller Foundation, which was basically saying, as impact investing becomes more sophisticated and we're studying the supply side of capital on the investment side, there seems to be a disconnect sometimes in the readiness of the entrepreneurs who are looking for funds. They call that the demand side, and we were part of a broader research consortium that was looking at the impact entrepreneurship space all around the globe. We took the domestic piece of it. So we did a bunch of things. Part of it was that we went out again and asked impact entrepreneurs to be part of our survey. I don't know if there's anyone in the room who was part of it. Yeah, great. Thought there might be. And there were about 300 enterprises that answered this time, so a great increase. And what we were trying to do is ask kind of 3 simple questions, and I'm going to walk you through. One is, how has the overall market of impact enterprises evolved over the 10 years? Anything different? 2, what are some of the segments of this space that might have the most potential for impact or for growth? And could we try to learn from people's performance data some different ways of thinking about this going forward? And the third is, what do they actually need? We have this proliferation of accelerators and crowdfunding and all these things, but what do people need to be prepared and ready? And it was really interesting because we went to the SBA. Mark used to work at the SBA. We went to Kauffman. We went to all these people and said, kind of, what survey data do you have about what people need? And there was almost questionnaire that we could find that was detailed on that, and so we made a whole bunch of stuff up and and asked it, and I'll share with you. So the overall goal of this project was to understand better the evolution, potential, and needs of domestic impact enterprises. Again, for-profit only was the boundary, and to say, well, what does that mean for philanthropic, private, and public investment to actually increase the success of these ventures. So the first thing that struck us from the data set was that it turned out that a third of the companies that happened to ask our answer our sample, because we didn't go through, we went through actually 200 intermediate organizations around the US and said, share this with your members, was that a third of those were what we call impact certified, which means they either had a product certification like LEED or Cradle to Cradle, or they had a company certification, which now mostly is B. And that when we took their ISIC codes, we divided all the companies into 7 impact segments, which are up on the slide, and that from a quarter to a third of all of those segments had a certified group within them. And then we looked at all the questions we asked about your financial performance and your impact area and your alignment and your needs, and we tried to cross-correlate, which is what academics get to do, all the data, and we ran every kind of combination, in that we kept coming up with nothing, not significant, except there was one thing that was significant, and that is the certification. The people who were certified, the companies that were certified, were off the charts on all of the metrics that we would ascribe to financial performance and growth. So they had more revenue, they had more net income, they were larger, they had more employees, and that when we tried to say, well, is this just because they're older, it wasn't related to just size. There were some other older companies and there were some other things. So it was a really interesting finding. It turns out that the certified companies are 4 times more likely to be financially successful than the non-certified companies. The second thing that we did is we took each company and we made up 2 new variables for them. So the first variable along the x-axis is impact commitment. And that was, what are they doing we weren't measuring their actual impact, but what have they done as a company to indicate commitment to impact? So were they incorporated in one of the new corporate forms? Were they certified? Do they have a third party measuring impact? Things like that, and we put that all into one measure. And then we also created a measure called pace of growth, which we had basically asked people for 3 years of historical data going back. And I do want to emphasize, this is not predictive data, this is self-reported historical data. And we said, how have you grown, again, revenue, employees, and some other factors, and put that together. And we created this landscape map. You'll notice it's another 4-quadrant map. It's just like I did with Ben, I did a 4-quadrant map, we did one over here.
And I went to law school to avoid all these things.
And ended up saying, people in the marketplace often talk really about quadrant 2, which is these impact gazelles, people who are highly committed to impact and high growth, right? That everyone wants kind of the win-win of high growth, high impact. But when you look at the sample, people are spread across all 4 quadrants, and they need different things depending on what quadrant they're in. And I want to come back to that. So then what we did is we started to say, well, how can we look at different segments of this using this quadrant analysis? So on the first one here, we took every impact industry and we mapped the companies that were in that segment. So here's the one for agriculture, health, and food. You see that there are enterprises in all 4 quadrants. You also see that red slope line is the average for that industry. And what's interesting about that line, of course, is that it's positive, right? So what this is saying is the average across all of the companies that are in the agriculture, health, and food segment, there is a positive correlation between their impact commitment and their growth, okay? So what was very interesting is we did this for all the segments were positive. So this notion that you cannot be committed to impact and grow, this data is empirically showing, at least for this set of companies, not true, right? We can do well and be committed. What is interesting, though, is that we also asked the companies about how well they served underserved populations. So we asked them a bunch of questions. We asked them, these were, again, companies in the U.S., but maybe they did their work elsewhere. So we asked, do you serve low-income populations domestically? Do you serve low-income populations abroad? Do you serve disabled? Do you serve minorities? A bunch of different things. And we mapped those as well. And here's the other interesting finding, is that, again, across this particular sample, all of the slopes for those, on average, were negative. So there is something about serving underserved populations which hampers growth across this now substantial pool that we were able to look at, which is significant for policy, and significant for some of the other things that people have talked about. And we are teasing that out. I will note the one underserved population that did not have a negative correlation was minorities. And one of our partners, Chinwe Oyengora at OH Community Partners, thought this was a really interesting finding because she's been involved in the 40 years of policy that have supported minority entrepreneurs and said, hey, this may actually show that policy makes a difference. And that's very interesting. The other thing that we did is we looked at, this is a little bit like Paula's priming the pump approach of looking at sectors. We said, you know, there are a whole bunch of sectors within the impact enterprise marketplace where anybody looking at the product and service that that company is in would agree that it's impactful, even if that company doesn't self-identify as an impact enterprise, right? If they're doing affordable housing, or they're doing K-12 public education, or a bunch of other things, they're in an impact sector. And so we actually identified 20 impact sectors in the US, and we did a series of interviews with people around the country about how well those sectors were able to access capital, how well the enterprises in those sectors were able to access capital, grow, get what they needed. And we were able to basically define a level of maturity and basically rank a bunch of different sectors on how mature they were. And so here's a sample of that. Financial products and services around community development, extremely mature. Education, energy, and real estate, medium level of maturity, some problems, and then in health, again, in kind of the affordable health area and professional services, very low levels of maturity. And we were able to put together, which I don't have a slide on, some of the kind of particular steps that a policymaker or a philanthropist or another private sector can do to bump someone up from one maturity level to the next, which we think has implications globally as well. It's kind of like looking at the domestic market, which might be 10 or 20 years ahead, and saying, what are you going to face and what can you influence? The last thing we did is I talked to you that we asked them a lot about their needs, and I just wanted to share this one thing which we thought was very interesting. The certified companies and the non-certified companies had vastly different expressions of their needs, which is, again, pretty interesting. The non-certified companies kept talking about mentorship. This was an open-ended, you know, answer whatever you want kind of question. Almost 70% of the answers said, I want a mentor, and I want someone who is in my industry area who has built a company and is ahead of where I am. But that's what I want. I don't want to go to a conference. I don't want to go coaching. All this mess. I don't want to be in an incubator. What I want is somebody who's been in my shoes within my industry and can give me that insight. And then the certified companies wanted a lot of other things, a lot about partnership, board development, kind of later stage sorts of issues, but and they wanted to go to conferences and be with peers in group settings. So that was interesting, again, thinking about the kind of intermediaries that you might want to support the field. So we've wrapped this all up in this kind of 3 layers of recommendations. One, mission lock. That being certified seems to make a difference. We don't know if it's causal. We just know it's correlated, but it's very interesting. And so one of our recommendations is, one of our hypotheses is that one of the reasons that this is the case, again, taking from some of the qualitative part of our study, is that when enterprises are able to say, this is our mission, someone else has blessed it, then they can move on and talk about other stuff. And that all the conversation doesn't get bogged down in how much is this going to cost me, and are you concessionary, or are you a radical, and all that stuff goes out the window. And it seems to make things simpler. Our second recommendation is take stock of the population that the enterprise is serving, especially as an investor. And be understanding of, it's not any mission that might cost you money, but if they are serving an underserved population, that is a sign to look more deeply at what that means for the growth pattern of the enterprise. And obviously for foundations who are doing program-related investments, that's why that mechanism was invented, and it totally makes sense, but we have to take that into account. And the last one is to think about, again, as an investor and also as an entrepreneur, how do you anchor yourself within the industry community that you want to be part of? How, think very carefully about how to participate within strong communities of practice within your industry. And we see kind of centers of excellence being started around the country around particular industry areas around impact, and we hope to see more of them. That's it.
All right. Is there anybody in here who thinks that I actually overhyped what we were going to learn from the presentation? Yeah, I didn't think so. Okay. Here's what we're going to do. This is going to turn into sort of what I imagine a faculty lounge conversation sometimes sounds like, except we're going to focus this on what can actually be done. What does this mean for the entrepreneurs? What does this mean for the investors in the room, the financial advisors, the wealth managers? What does this research tell us about where the opportunities and needs are in the actual economy? So we're gonna talk some, and then we're gonna throw it open to questions. And I think there's a happy hour coming up, but we're gonna go until we don't have questions or people get really tired of us, basically. So yeah, go. Okay. So forget me asking questions. Paula, go ahead.
Sorry.
No, I mean, go ahead. This is going to be a better question.
I am completely fascinated by number 2 and the disadvantaged population question, right? I'm wondering if your sample size was big enough for you to disaggregate within disadvantaged populations when you start looking at those that are earlier or more mature firms, and then earlier, more mature industries, whether you start to see patterns, right? Are you saying permanently and throughout time, if you serve disadvantaged populations, growth is hampered? Or are you saying in the beginning, growth is hampered, and then it can accelerate once you've sort of broken down a bunch of market, or fixed actually a bunch of market failure?
It's a great question. I don't know. We'd have to go back to the data and see if we asked enough in the right way to try to answer it.
Well, and that is another reason why doing longitudinal studies and tracking these initiatives and firms and investments over time, it becomes really important.
Yep. Wish we could do that.
Yeah, well.
So that would go in the support infrastructure-based organizations to actually get answers to questions like that over time, that I think could be translated for portfolio managers and others into actual data that they can use going forward.
I just have a question or a comment. This is really fascinating. Kathy, I'm curious as well. I think part of the issue in the US is a reluctance on the part of entrepreneurs to self-identify as being social entrepreneurs. And we talked about this a little bit when you were doing the study. Part of the reason the impact entrepreneurs had a particular, it had a very particular reason for calling them that. And I know that in the UK, as you say, Alicia, a lot of the policy out of the UK has come as a result of good data that they have. They do a 2-year survey in the UK of all small business out of whatever it is, the Small Business Administration in the UK, I don't know what it's called. And they ask all businesses in the UK, are you a social enterprise? And they have a very clear definition of what that is. I think about a quarter of all businesses say that we're mission driven. And then I think when they actually ask them, it's something like, are more than 50% of your profits reinvested in the business for the purpose of meeting that mission? Or it's a quantitative way of defining it. The number becomes 6%. So when I hear policymakers in the UK talk about it, they say categorically that 6% of all small businesses in the United Kingdom are social enterprises. And it relies on the small business to self-identify, to say you're a social enterprise. And I think in the States, my sense is this market is so big, but it's very in the shadows. Partly because of literally like a cultural disposition towards self-identifying as having a social.
I agree with you, and so here's my reaction to that. And some of it is intuitive, and some of it is based on the data. So, unlike in the UK, the impact enterprises here, from what we know about them, because we know and love them, and also from the research that we've done, almost none of them use the UK definition. right, of having to forego payback to an external policy as a definition of their impact, right? That is not the flavor of impact definition. What I'm saying is, based on this data, I think the stuff that, that the B certification has encompassed is the emerging definition in this country. And what we see in the data is, the other part of this that I didn't talk about is the companies that are not certified are mostly small. And so you know, part of that is kind of going, well, what happens when they grow up? Well, what happens when they grow up is they didn't answer the survey, right? So what we're seeing, I think, is a bifurcation in this country where you may talk about impact when you're young and you're trying to tell your impact story to this guy because he's an impact investor. You're trying to tell a non-impact story to this guy because he's a financial investor. But you make a choice. Are you going to lock in this mission or not? And if you lock in this mission, like you talked to Paul Sansone at Better World Books, he said, we will never strip away our B certification. That is who we are. If you don't like it, we don't want to work with you. Versus other companies who are saying, well, once I get other kind of funding, I don't really want to talk about this anymore because that's going to hurt me. And this ambivalence, I think, is turning into two different paths. I think if we go another 5 years, those paths will become even more stark and maybe measurable, and we could do what the UK has done and actually call it a percentage.
So what does that intuition mean for the investors in the room who are looking at potential deals? Do you not do the investment without the requirement that not currently certified business gets certified? Let me do this. Let me ask this of
You can ask the room.
folks in the room, because I think it's time for this to turn into a conversation with sort of everybody now. For the folks who actually are managers of or advisors for wealth, when you look at businesses that might have responded to Kathy's survey, maybe didn't but might next time, what is the data that's coming back telling you? What would you like it to tell you? What could it help you do in the future? Is there anyone who wants to even attempt to answer what I just asked? Paul.
Sure. Hi, Paul Herman, HIP investor. So this is very exciting, especially when there's a 2x2 with lots of dots and R-squared line on it. So was it part of the scope to also look at what the impact commitment or some proxy for it, like job creation or greenhouse gas profile was for traditional venture-backed companies or other types of companies? Because what would be helpful from an advisor perspective, at least getting the skeptics across, is, okay, positive line, love it. Is the line higher or lower for the ones who haven't declared a commitment, but they've grown in a super investment? That's one question.
So we don't have a comp group in this study. We could do it again with a comp group, but if they don't have a commitment to impact, our whole table falls apart. So, right? I mean, you'd have to, if they're not, I don't think that most companies would answer the variables that we ascribed.
Because there's a second follow-up for the next $1 million study. So one of the things we looked at was the Bureau of Labor Statistics. You can actually parse out by industry, but you can't parse it out by company. And what we found was that the industries that are associated with creating a positive impact for 2002 to 2011 created jobs at a rate of 2% a year, and ones that didn't basically destroyed jobs. And it destroyed it the most in the meltdown, but it was never, the impact sector always created jobs by what it was associated with. So that would be, to actually get the company data, you have to get the IRS to release an anonymized set. So that would be really exciting, because I know Hoffman has had reports that show that basically, especially during the meltdown, on average creates 90% of SME jobs. SMEs create 90% of jobs, but during the meltdown they created 110% of jobs because large multinationals basically destroyed. So anything on the proxy?
The only issue there is that in pace of growth, we did include net job growth. So that variable was in our survey, but we don't have a comp. We don't have a counterfactual.
Yeah, in the back my left, and then to the right.
Thank you. I was just curious for the correlations between some of the variables that you regressed. Were there fairly respectable R-squares between those? Because when I look at the conclusions on this last page, particularly about not focusing on underserved populations are being, very careful about that. It seems like, just broad-based looking at the graphs, we're dealing with very
Different, right?
diffuse
They are.
scatter plots, right? And so to really deduce that we should avoid serving underserved
Well, I wasn't
populations is
saying, what did you mean? Yeah, I wasn't saying that we should avoid it. What I'm saying, when you going back to the grid of the turtles and stuff, I just think they need something different. I think we need to recognize that there are segments here that we do not have capital at scale matching what they need.
So let me, Ben, I was going to ask you this question,
Yeah.
and then we'll come back to the question that was in the back of the room.
We
The
have
access
it for
to
financial services, we have it in community development, but that's kind of it.
Right. So the access to capital, the convergence of the need of the various types of entrepreneurs for the appropriate capital and the actual availability of that capital with the mechanisms to match the two. It will never be 100% perfect, and not 100% of small businesses should get investment because there are some bad business ideas out there. But it's true.
But see, this is where good data can make a real
Yeah,
difference.
So this is my question.
And now
What-
I get to be angry and do my 2-minute, because millions of people are watching on
I'm
YouTube.
glad Ben
at
is sitting between me
the
and you.
pathetic situation of the U.S. and our SME financing data.
Mm-hmm.
I worked on with the OECD and the G20 SME financing working groups, and we are just appallingly behind most of the rest of the OECD. The SBA, doesn't even. So we get SME data from call report data, which is proxied by loan size, not by firm size. So they proxy SME lending by $1 million or less, even though SBA guarantees loans of 2 to 5 million these days. So we don't even have loan size data by firm size. Now, the Dodd-Frank regulations have come out asking banks to do a lot of different things, but nothing's happened yet. On the supply side, we don't even have any data. We do proxies, which are completely wrong. And then on the demand side, the Federal Reserve, where I used to work, had a survey every 5 years looking at a large cross-section of SMEs and looking at their financing patterns. In 2003, they said, we've done this every 5 years for the last 20 years. We've seen everything there is to see. And in 2007, they canceled it. So in 2008, when the financial crisis happened, the Kaufman Firm Survey was the only survey data on a large representative sample of U.S. firms that we had. The Federal Reserve had nothing. And they've been talking about reinstating it and ideally doing an annualized one so we have timely information on SME financing. But it's been all talk and no action, and we've just seen nothing on the demand or the supply side. So really, the government can't make good policy decisions because they have no good data.
So let me put my former policy hat back on, ask you not to punch me in the face, and ask it this way. For the folks for whom the data would be useful, how would it be useful, and what can government point to as it having accomplished for making the policy change? Because folks are going to have to advocate for that. Folks do advocate for this. What is the focused result, the positive benefit from doing this?
I really appreciate your plea, because I work for BDAG and we have this challenge, is that we have all this data on these companies who stood up and want to be recognized as being leaders, but we don't have the comparables. So we can't tell a story about what's different in terms of performance. Like, we can't say, their job growth is greater, or we can't say they're more likely to have charitable giving, because we don't know what a traditional company is doing. And so in terms of policy, in terms of some of the things that Ben had up on the slide, procurement benefits, we need to be able to tell the government what they're getting by having procurement benefit for a B corporation. And it's hard to do that without comparables. And so we are kind of desperately seeking different ways to find comparables so that we can better tell that story. So if anybody has ideas on comparable development, please come talk to me afterwards.
So, Ben, this strikes me as an area that government is maybe absolutely necessary, or a quasi-governmental agency is necessary in order to get the data that the community is asking for or demanding.
Right. Yeah, and I think the challenge is telling and I'd be interested, Alicia, in why you think the government hasn't stepped up. I mean, is what's missing, and my sense is this may be part of it, is a cohesive story about precisely what you asked, Mark, which is what the data will tell us and how we can benefit from this. Because I think that's part of the issue around self-identification too, Kathy. I'm not sure, until we own this and we can really state the benefits of this, and social enterprises begin to advocate as a group, like a plug for the Social Enterprise Alliance and others that are trying to do that, and Investors Circle becoming larger, and these groups that are representative. I think that it's going to be a challenge. I mean, this is politics to some extent, right? And it's about the fact we can demonstrate that this is a vibrant and growing and important economic engine and job creation engine right now, because I think that's what will cut through the Washington situation.
Sorry, please.
Oh, I was just going to say it's a lack of leadership.
Yeah. From the industry or from government or both?
Mainly from government, from the policymakers. It's just, I'm not saying Obama. I'm saying Bernanke. I mean, I actually cornered him at one point and said, we cannot do these things now that the survey does not exist, and both demand side and supply side. And he literally said, so you mean the current surveys that have replaced it or are used instead do not get the same information that survey got? And it was all I could do to say, are you kidding me? And so I don't know what his people are telling him, but there's a lack of leadership below Bernanke that is not informing him.
That's interesting.
And the SBA, I asked the administrator, why aren't you demanding, firm size data, lending information by firm size? And she said, I don't want to ask for the impossible. It's not the impossible. It was
let me back up a little bit and go back to this idea of advocating for a positive economic outcome, which I think is a valuable way to go forward. And what I'm going to ask is I'm going to switch over to the international side for a minute. And Paula, I ask you, have you seen? I mean, clearly there are models where the data collection has worked in places that are common law jurisdictions, because I want to feel like I got something from my law school education. What have you seen work over a period of time, going from not having data to having data that can be used to drive real economic decisions?
To be honest, on the impact investing side, I think we're still too early days to answer that question. What I was gonna say, and because I don't think and you asked an earlier question about the implications of like what does the lack of data do? The lack of data directly affects investment money. There's a ton of capital sitting on the sidelines right now that is not going in because this data does not exist. And I will say, part of it is tied up, we work a lot with high net worth individuals through the Giving Pledge and other networks who are super excited. They like impact investing. Yes, we're going to do it. And then what's the next step? And they're trying to compare, clean tech investing in the US with education for the BOP in East Africa, expecting kind of that it's all one same economic equation, because the other piece of this data, and this goes back to the importance of the distinction that Kathy was making and the need for longitudinal data there, is to say, we need to start segmenting the market and creating, what are reasonable economic expectations for the different buckets within impact investing. And until we do that, not only are we not going to be able to take advantage of all this capital that's sitting on the sidelines, we actually are risking the industry, because people are applying false expectations to market segments where you may not reasonably be able to expect growth that quickly.
Is it fair to think that in some ways the impact economy, rather than being the one thing that many think it is, mirrors the regular economy? And this goes back to an earlier panel, but instead of being just an asset class, it is a lens or a practice across asset classes. I mean, is that fair to think?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think that the matrix that I put up there we're making the point that funds do different things and that they serve different functions that are all valid and important. But I just want to return to a point about one of your findings, Kathy, the finding about underserved communities, because it is analogous to what we've seen at the fund level, where and so it's interesting to me because it comes down to like what is the actual market failure there. And in underserved communities, there are a ton of them, and they're very entrenched, and the government needs to be very involved, and probably will always need to be in some markets. Whereas it was interesting historically in the private equity market in the States, the community finance part of the private equity market, that the focus on minorities specifically became something that no longer needed to be subsidized, because the failure was that white men were running the private equity market, and so the entrepreneurs who were minority and women were just not part of that network. And as soon as pension funds started creating emerging manager programs and minority and women-owned fund management companies emerged, that sector grew, and you see that the LPs in some of those private equity funds are traditional institutional LPs. But there's not traditional institutional LPs investing in the segment of private equity markets funds targeting underserved markets. So just by looking at who the LPs are and the different kinds of private equity funds, like women and minority-owned private equity funds versus like community development private equity funds, like one is all foundations and CRA and government money, the other is institutional pension funds. And just that proxy alone tells me that the women and minority market has now reached a greater level of maturity where subsidy is not as necessary, but the underserved market remains very problematic. And so it's just, I just throw that out there because your data sort of supports
that.
It reinforces that at the enterprise level. And I think so it'd be interesting as an analog to look at what happened, with emerging manager programs of pension funds and how that did help alleviate some of those access to capital issues within that particular community of entrepreneurs.
Fran?
Yeah, so just wanting to get back to government for a second, because it seems like there are real policy implications to some of your findings, Kathy, and you started off, Ben, talking about how social enterprise can help achieve mutual policy objectives, both domestic and foreign. It seems to me like we got some traction with different government agencies when Sean Green and Mark were at the SBA. We had a reprogramming of $1 billion to an SBIC program that addressed more impact sectors.
And has quietly not working anymore.
Correct. Well, yes.
Yeah.
I'd like to definitely hear about that. We had, when Secretary Clinton was at the State Department, we had a very robust dialogue there. Treasury, we hear about and then we kind of don't hear from. And I'm just wondering from anyone on the panel, it seems like we were getting some really nice traction in Washington. And what can we do as an industry, whether it's an industry group or whatever it is, to try to raise our profile and show the synergies?
Can
I will just say, somebody please pick up on that industry group question.
Yes.
I think there are lessons to be learned from how other industries have organized themselves in order to express the message that is real and based on positive economic outcomes.
Right. Yeah, I would just underline what you both just said, right? We don't have an outside game. We don't have an industry group that is a policy advocacy community or a policy, so, and there are a lot of names in the industry, but we don't speak with a collective voice. And
there's about to be one.
Yeah.
So together. So a lot of our policy work has happened together with the Initiative for Responsible Investment at Harvard University, and we've created. If people are really into policy, and most people are not, but we have.
You're different.
We have created a network called the Impact Investing Policy Collaborative. It is real. It has a website and a conference and a network of around 200 researchers and policymakers who meet annually to talk about these issues. And that group is partnering with enterprise community partners, a major national CDFI, to launch an accelerating impact investing policy initiative, and we'll be hiring someone in DC to essentially head up a 2-year domestic impact investing policy initiative. So this is happening now, and we're super excited about it, and we are totally looking for supporters and advocates and people to join us in that.
Well,
in
let's
that
not also
initiative.
forget the B efforts on corporate
yeah, of
law.
course, yeah,
You know, and
right.
changing corporate law in how many states? 17 states now or something? 15?
Right.
13 plus Delaware.
Delaware.
Delaware counts as 20. Right. So, you know,
Super
that we
exciting.
we have a little movement afoot
Right.
within this space, but we haven't.
So,
launched
so
it.
from my perspective, having those movements that are identifiable as entities, rather than dispersed and disaggregated group or cacophony of voices.
I think what's important about, I forgot the other thing I was going to say, is I think what's important about those movements is that policy respects them better when they're coming from the entrepreneurs as opposed to the investors.
Mhm. And so this was going to lead me to what will be my final question. For the entrepreneurs, this has been a lot of talk about policy and research. There are some real tangible outcomes from what Kathy just presented and what we've talked about. What can the entrepreneurs, what should the entrepreneurs take away from this discussion? Does anybody feel like raising their hand to answer that? Or I have my own ideas, but I sort of throw that open to the room. What can the entrepreneurs learn from what we've just talked about?
What do you take away as opposed to what should? You know, think about what are there comments or other conclusions that come to mind for you?
Besides answering every survey that comes across
Yeah,
our
right.
desk.
That is the
phone,
other problem. That's the great
mail.
thing about the Kaufman Firm survey is there's 8,000 companies and no one else has to do it. No.
So is it?
I
The power is with the entrepreneurs because they create the job.
Yeah.
And that's something that's bipartisan. Like, we can shop sustainable domestic jobs across the aisle. So, I'd be interested in hearing from the entrepreneurs in the audience too about, the fact that Washington wants to hear from entrepreneurs, like, that's great. And that suggests that maybe there needs to be, an entrepreneurship advisory group or
Yeah.
membership group of your group. If that's what folks in Washington want to hear from, and we know from the Kaufman work that businesses under 5 years created all net new jobs from the mid-'70s to the mid-2000s, and so to me that's very bipartisan and so topical.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say as an entrepreneur, I've been thinking a lot about how we can connect with our community of customers and really try to engage them in the narrative of the company and our struggle to succeed and become a really successful product in the energy efficiency space. And to me, I keep coming back to the idea that really, being more open and declared about our sustainability vision and all the steps we're taking internally is kind of our, it's the commitment part, right? And it feels really strategic to me in the sense that I want my customers to believe in my company. And it has to be more than just about my company becoming successful and making me and my investors rich, right? It has to be part of the narrative in the community. And so we're really, we're exploring ways to do that through social media, but also really trying to figure out how to connect with people at the community level. And so your kind of talk has really encouraged me to kind of really try and figure out how to make that commitment really stick, and then how to make it a part of our brand and part of our communication with our audience. So
Great.
I think it's really very inspiring.
I'm glad for that. Thank you.
Related to that, the whole, I don't know if you've heard about the conscious capitalism movement and all the books that are out on that these days. I just went to their conference in San Francisco a few weeks ago. And I think it is important to that it's not, the stakeholders are not just the shareholders. The stakeholders are your community, your employers, and so I think articulating that with your various stakeholders and gathering momentum around that movement is going to be a good thing.
There are other questions? All right. Well, first I want to thank the Investors Circle team for putting this together. It is not an easy thing to do, to organize a conference, a network, an infrastructure-based organization in a space that's still emerging with people who have lots of different opinions about where things have been, are going, and should go. That said, a panel where everybody agrees on absolutely everything and thinks the sky is bright and the sun is shining is a panel where you're probably not going to learn anything or be provoked at all. So thank you, everybody here, for actually sharing real opinions and beliefs and things that are based on data and the need for data. Kathy, thank you for presenting.
Let's thank Bonnie, because she co-wrote the report with me.
Hey,
Give her a hand.
See, so that, for those of you watching at home, is Bonnie Mullenbrook, Executive Director of Investor Circle, who is fantastic.
Yes,
Let me close by saying this. As passionate as we all are about impact, many of the folks who have been most successful have done it by applying sound sort of other industry practices, whether it's sound management practices, sound public policy practices, sound research practices. And the more we push towards whatever our eventual outcome is by modeling off of what has worked previously, whether it's in working with government, in public-private partnerships, in research, in investing, or the high-growth startup world, I think ends up to our benefit because it helps us tell a story that's based on stuff people have already seen and understand. And then we have a better story. And I think that's what's so compelling for me about impact. So if the panel has any last comments, otherwise it's happy hour time.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, everybody, and see you next time.